It's really releasing the stories, right, that we have and around what we're doing, so we can really make the decision that we feel is really best for us and our family. And that's how I feel like societal expectations really can kind of be broken down, in the sense of the stories we're told about who's a good mom, you know, of like the mom that stays at home and does the thing, but that doesn't necessarily fit in every scenario. And sometimes having a woman and a mom who is working actually is better for the family. A lot of the times where a lot of that challenge and struggle comes from is just from the stories that we have around what we think being a good mom is, or what the definition is of what we've been told or modeled. You know, when you're able to just do something that really aligns for you, and your cup is filled, and you know that you're in the place that you need to be, that's ultimately going to be the best place. I would say that applies in all areas of life, you know, not just motherhood.
Welcome to the Reinvent Health podcast. I'm NicciRobertson, and today we're diving into a conversation that so many of us, especially mothers, need to hear. Setting boundaries is one of the hardest things to do, yet it's essential for our health, well-being, and the way we show up for our families. Why do we struggle with it so much? Why do we feel so depleted? And why are we constantly giving without refilling our own cups? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen, a highly respected functional medicine practitioner who specialises in women's health, burnout, and performance. She's here to shed light on why boundaries are so difficult to maintain, the physiological and emotional toll of overgiving, and how we can start reclaiming our energy and well-being. Dr. Kirstin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here again.
I've been following you on Instagram. I always do. I follow you in Threads, and you always have such deep and insightful and thought-provoking posts almost all of the time. And we can all relate. I think most of our audience can certainly relate to what you've been putting out there. So let's start out with and really understanding it and unpacking the issue. Why do so many of us, particularly women, really struggle to set and maintain boundaries?
I think the like, if we get right down to the root of it, is really part of it is where we learn these sorts of patterns, right, from when we're younger. Modeling is huge. I think we underestimate the amount that we learn from not just our parents, but also from our grandparents and other family members, as well as how we see mothers in society, right? Like our friends as moms. I'm thinking about teachers and schools. You know, we're picking up on so much when we're little. And I've actually been doing a whole lot of reading and just continual research on this. And one thing that I find so fascinating is this idea that we tend to look at like disease, and I'll tie this all together, but we tend to look at like disease as something that gets passed down genetically. But what's fascinating is when you actually really start looking at why and how the body starts to get like a chronic illness or a disease, it's really not a whole lot of it has to do with the genetics, so to speak, but it has a lot more to do with the environment and the lifestyle that was passed down. And this goes so much further because we've been taught like, oh, it's not to say this is not important, but nutrition and exercise, like all of those things are very important. And it is the patterns and programming, so to speak, the conditioning that gets passed down that we learn from our moms, from our dads, from our family, the people who raised us, that actually has a far more significant impact on whether we get something or not. And I'm going to give an example just to round this off, what I mean.
Right.
Speaking of boundaries, right? And speaking of this idea of taking care of ourselves, like a pattern that can be very common that's passed down is that we've got to put everyone else before ourselves. So meeting our family's needs over our needs.
Yeah.
And it's this constant self-sacrifice. The issue with that is that not only does it leave us with an empty cup, But it also then sets our kids up to learn the same thing and give their body, the one and only body that they have,
Yeah.
the signal that everyone else and everything else is more important than our own well-being. And that message that gets sent to the body is really important. And what I've, in my experience, have seen is one of the most common denominators across the board when it
Yeah.
comes to health, chronic health conditions, and burnout and overwhelm and all of the other things
Mm,
that we tend to see inside of motherhood.
mm, mm.
Well, in life,
And
it's not just
yeah,
motherhood, but you know.
exactly, exactly. And I think this is the transgenerational curse that we hear about all the time is what are we perpetuating from generations ago? And how do we
Mhm.
stop doing that? Because it is within our control. I think this is what we don't
Yeah.
really realize that you can stop this at any time. You've just got to want to stop it badly enough.
Yeah, I saw something just literally just recently that was like the when you are aware of something, when you're aware of a pattern, you can actually do something about it. We call
Yeah.
this conscious awareness. It's pulling what's in the subconscious to the conscious mind and then giving you the opportunity to then choose something different. But then what's in your subconscious mind is really what's controlling you.
Yeah.
And it's controlling you on a level that you're not even really like consciously aware of. So
Yeah.
that's where I feel like these patterns, bringing awareness to them with compassionate curiosity is really where, like for yourself, is like really where this work really tends to shine, because you then start realizing like the more awareness that you have means that the more choices that you have.
Yeah.
And that I think is so helpful when it really comes to looking at some of this deep stuff of like, where do a lot of these patterns come from?
Yeah, and creating choice is the antidote to managing stress because when we're stressed, we feel like
Yeah.
back against the wall. We don't have an option, we don't have a choice, but we
Yep.
actually do when we
Right.
start really unpacking it. And something you said there made me think that it's not all or nothing. You don't have to be, all doing everything for your kids and everything for your family and nothing for yourself, or everything for yourself and nothing. There's a give and take in life. There's an ebb and flow in everything. And I think it's also understanding
Mhm.
that we've got to find that rhythm where we
Yeah.
can fill our cup and be there and be able to accept help and to give help and to find the pattern and the rhythm in life, which no one ever said you've got to find a pattern and a rhythm in life until someone does. They go, oh, that actually makes sense. And I think this is
Hmm.
where these conversations are really, really valuable. So, just to set the stage for our listeners, for those who haven't heard you before, because we're growing our audience really nicely. Is where did you start learning for yourself? Or how did you start seeing the absence of self-care playing out in your health and in not only mental health but physical health as well for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got into all of this because I had endometriosis that with the conventional treatment turned into migraines. And at the same time was also trying to address, the common problems that you have in teenagehood, which is acne and, all of those things.
Oh yeah.
And the result ended up with taking antibiotics. They worked. They worked.
Mm. They
But
do.
I took
Mm.
them often
Ah,
throughout my teenage years. And that really set my gut up for quite a lot of issues. By the time I was in college, I had endometriosis, I had migraines, and then on top of that, it really hurt to eat food. So that led to kind of a wonky relationship with food and mindset and emotional, state with food because when something hurts to do, it
oh yeah.
does things. It does things to your brain.
Yeah. Mm.
And so I I tried all the conventional things and they just weren't doing it for me. They weren't working. They were actually, I learned later on, making a lot of the problems worse. And that's when I started learning about nutrition. And that's when everything really kicked off from there. You start with nutrition and then start realizing, oh, there's so many more layers to this. And
Oh yeah.
fast forward many years, I became a doctor of chiropractic because I realized I loved, I had a choice. I could have gone to get my MD could have gone any other route. I went the chiropractic route because what I loved about how the like chiropractic in general tends to look at the body is that the body is wanting to heal itself. It's constantly trying to do that. What gets in there's so many different things that get in the way, but when you remove that interference, then the body is able to restore itself back to a certain level of balance, and that's where it wants to be.
Mm.
And I loved that, and I found it to be so helpful for, migraines. And I loved the idea of working with the nervous system. I thought it was just, I love the brain. And so it's not beyond me that like I ended up full circle back working with like psychology and all of that, and neuroscience. But anyway, I just loved the way that chiropractic really looked at disease and injuries and illness. And so I went that route, found functional medicine at the same time, which really tied a lot of pieces together as far as seeing the body as a whole, right? Really identifying that the organ systems don't all function in isolation. And, the further educated that doctors typically get or specialists typically get is they get even more rooted down into the one system or the one part, view how the body functions. And looking at it more as a whole gives you a whole lot better idea of what's happening with that patient or that person, right? Yeah. So then I was still dealing with endometriosis and migraines and all of those things, even despite, all of the education and things that I was doing to not only try and heal myself, but also to help others as well. And that's when I started finding, I started with neuro-linguistic programming, but essentially started finding that these patterns, your emotions or lack of desire to deal with your emotions and all those stored things and patterns, right? All of those really influence our ability to heal because they are part of the patterns that create the problem in the first place.
Exactly, yeah.
So and just like I talked about at the beginning, right? Like if we're constantly seeing that if we're saying to ourselves like, oh, I'm too busy to deal with my health right now. It's too busy at work. It's too busy with the kids. It's too busy in life right now to do something for me, for my health. The signal that you're sending to your body and your brain is that you are not worth the time.
Yes.
And so those patterns are what are underneath all of those other things. And so what, I tend to see is that, we've spent all of this time and effort in the nutrition and the diet and the exercise and the managing stress and the self-care and the drinking filtered water and then, being told like you're eating too much protein and not enough protein and like, all of the things, right? And then you still end up with like this, you still have the symptoms or you still have the problems. It's kind of like, well, what else can I do? And it's because really underneath all of it, when you get to those underlying patterns, it then allows for all of the other things that you are doing to do their job even better. Anyway, so that's how I really got to where I am today is I've really kind of gone full circle in the sense that like the brain starts everything. And if we're going to be looking at the physical body, it's the mental, emotional stories. It's your spiritual journey. It's on top of that, the physical body and creating physical health as well. The thing is that sometimes I think like, wow, that's a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I also think too, when you leverage the power of the brain and your thought patterns, it actually makes all of the other efforts that you're putting into healing and getting what you want a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
Because you're no longer fighting these resistance points, and you're getting even deeper into where the pattern came from in the first place.
You make a really good point because and I know you get this in your practice as well, where people come in and they're doing all the green juices and the smoothies and they're calorie counting and they're exercising and they're tracking their sleep and they sit there desperate in front of you and they go, but it's not working. I'm still feeling ill. I've still got headaches. I've still got body aches. I've still got gut issues. It's because we haven't actually dealt with the biggest and most important organ in the body, which is the brain. And it's the most difficult thing to deal with, and it takes the longest time, and it's not to say, like you said, it's not to say nutrition isn't important. Of course it's important, But
Mhm.
if we're not dealing with the controlling system that is determining how the rest of our body functions, it's pretty much all
Mhm.
to nothing. I hate to
Yeah.
say it, but it's true.
Yeah, it is. Well, and well, actually, I will say that I do hear that a lot, right? Is that same
Mm.
pattern, and I really like to reframe where people are coming from with that because the
Yeah.
nutrition and the habits that you are setting up, they actually are doing a heck of a lot underneath the
Yeah.
surface, right? I mean, if
Yeah.
we,
Oh,
even
yeah.
if you're not seeing symptom resolution, if you're eating a diet that does have a whole lot of like colorful foods and
Yeah.
proteins and you're eating a really balanced diet, you're reducing a heck of a lot of inflammation.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
doing a lot of things underneath the surface. Your cells, you're giving them what they need. It's just there are so many other reasons uh on top of that as far as why
Oh, yeah.
that's just not always enough,
Mm.
which I hate to say because it's such a like it's such a thing, but it's you know if I know that a lot of people like me, I learned a statistic just yesterday that so endometriosis being like kind of an autoimmune condition is kind of how they're seeing it,
Yeah.
that it can take people on average 4 years to get a diagnosis, and then potentially they go through 20 on average 20 different practitioners
Oh,
before they finally get just a diagnosis, which is really just the start of the journey. So I say that because first off, I was shocked by that statistic.
yeah.
But
That's
secondly,
crazy.
it makes sense why people are kind of like, what is happening? Because I'm doing all of these things and I'm really
Mm.
not seeing the resolution or the remission that
Yeah.
I should be seeing when everybody's telling me that this is what I need to be doing and this is what should be working. It's just how these kind of like health journeys go.
Exactly, exactly. So, what are the most common symptoms when a person's running on empty? Because I think we're all very, very
Mhm.
disconnected from our bodies and our brains, and we're all just running, but we don't know when we're running on
Yeah.
empty until it's too late. So, what are the, I'd say, early warning signs that a person could look out for?
Wow. I think they vary quite a bit, but I'll try and narrow some of them down. Running on empty can feel like there's a difference between having energy and running off of adrenaline.
Okay.
So I would say that feeling where there's like a pattern that can sometimes happen where you start, it's like your body feels like it's amping up the stress in order to perform and to produce and to do more. And it's a feeling that is in I can recognize it in my own body, but it is that feeling of like, okay, I'm gonna go, go, go. I'm gonna get this done. I'm gonna rush through and I push, push, push,
Yeah.
push, push. Uh, that is a very different feeling than like waking up and being like, I've got some clean energy for the day. Like
Aha.
you're producing, you're doing things, you're getting things done, but you don't feel like you're against the grind.
Aha.
It's a different space. And I will say this is also something we teach as well, which is that is the difference in your nervous system when you have trained your nervous system and you have a lot of capacity versus you're really pushing the line as far as what you
Yeah.
have the capacity and the tolerance for. And when you're using your cortisol and your adrenals to try and like facilitate that energy, that's where you're starting to cross over that line of what do I actually have the capacity and tolerance for. Other symptoms, things like just fatigue. Your body just feels like it's slowing down, like it's just not recovering quickly. Sleep is one that gets affected really quickly as well. Like maybe you're waking up multiple times a night, or you're just having a really hard time falling asleep, or you wake up and an hour later you're still just kind of like sluggish.
Yeah.
I would also say too, we talk about burnout a lot. I would say if you're spending a decent amount of your day feeling like things just aren't good enough, like they're just like you're just constantly kind of in your stories, constantly feeling like there's just not enough. There's not enough time, there's
Mm,
not enough energy, there's not enough
mm,
anything, right? I think that's
mm.
where, or feeling really just run down. That getting sick often, I would say, is
Yeah.
another one.
Mm,
Looking at signs of your immune system just starting to kind of struggle a little bit. Even being around kids a lot, you can still get sick and recover within a couple of
yeah,
days versus it taking you weeks to 2 weeks, to
exactly.
get over it. Anytime I hear that, I'm like, we've got some work to do because I've got a kiddo. We were sick. We saw lots of illness over December and January, but
Yeah.
the difference is who started recovering a whole lot faster and who it took much longer, to deal with. Other signs, I would say early signs, I will see we covered immune system. This is going to be weird, but like constipation or like GI stuff is
Mm-hmm.
like early signals, early signs that
Yeah.
like maybe there's something going a little off. Which I know sounds kind of like out of left field, but your nervous system is directly connected to your gut. And so anything that kind of
Exactly.
slows down there or speeds up or bloating, any kind of weird stuff happening there is oftentimes somewhat connected to what's going on in other areas.
Mm,
And
mm,
I'll say last thing, recovery as far as working out. So let's say you're training, you're just not being able to do as much as you used to be able to do, and you're just not really recovering as quickly as you expect you should.
yeah.
You should be.
Yeah.
So you're staying sore for longer, getting maybe some niggles. I like to call them niggles, injuries, things that are just not quite right. Those are all, I think, signs where people are starting to overreach on their capacity.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. And I mean, I find for myself that when I'm feeling fine, but somebody comes up to me and goes, "Oh, you're looking so tired." It's like, oh my goodness.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
where it's like, oh, okay, okay, I hear you. Because that's before
Uh-huh.
I even realize that something's going south, is when a stranger says,
Hmm.
"Oh, are you getting enough sleep?" It's like, oh, is it that obvious? And also things like moodiness and cynicism, where you get irritated with
Yep.
people who don't deserve it, and cynical about
Yeah.
things you just never would have otherwise. And those are really big red flags that we don't associate with burnout.
Yes, yes. That goes into the whole emotional patterns of how we tend to handle emotions. I would say one thing that is really common for women that I tend to work with, I tend to see a lot, is that they go into
Mm.
doing mode over feeling their emotions, and so that's another kind of symptom of like, okay, I'm just going to try and fix this. I'm just going to, do what I can do to problem solve instead of actually face and feel these emotions. So that can be another cause
It
of when
is.
you're there.
It is. And
Yeah.
I mean, you're putting out a lot of posts that are really around motherhood. And a lot of the
Yeah.
moms that I get to chat to go, I don't want to admit to this, but I sometimes just don't want to be around my children, or I don't want to be around my spouse.
Yeah.
I can't stand them sometimes. And it's like, because we create a safe space where people can feel like they can say anything, but this is not uncommon and it's not something to feel guilty about. It doesn't mean you don't love your children. It means that you're just not giving yourself enough breathing space. And I think it's really important to
Yeah.
acknowledge that.
Yeah. Well, on that note, on that point, so I think there's this interesting pattern or programming that in order for us to have really good relationships with our kids, we have to be present 24/7 all of the time. Like we can never leave them.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
And the thing about that is that number one, when you are more when first off, when you're able to actually take some time away to reset
Yeah.
yourself, fill your own cup. This is this is not just necessarily saying like um going and getting a facial or your nails done. Like I'm talking about like maybe you're just going to take a walk by yourself.
Yeah.
Something so simple as that, right? Something that gets you maybe out of the house, gets you outside. Maybe it's going and doing something for you that you really love to do. It's exercise, maybe that's going and painting or doing something a hobby wise that you really love to do that fills your cup. Those things are going to do a whole lot more. And on top of that, your kids are going to get not only the benefit of you
Mm.
feeling more tolerant, you have more capacity because your
Yeah.
cup is full. You're also going to teach them that it is also okay for them to be away from you as well.
Yeah.
The two of those combined actually create a much more secure attachment, a secure bond, than you being constantly present all of the time and feeling like you just mentioned, just like you cannot, you would love to just get away from your kids or get away
Yeah.
from your, spouse or whatever. At those points is usually when I say, like, we have lost the capacity or the tolerance for stress. Those are signs and symptoms that is like we've gone over the edge a bit. It's time to take some time and get some time. Like, you don't have to go on a straight up like vacation or a retreat for a weekend.
Yeah.
It's just, even a 10 to 20-minute walk where maybe you're doing some nervous system training that then
Yes.
really just helps you reset. And that alone can do wonders.
Yeah, the power of the 10-minute little exercise snack is actually so, so important. And what you said about it's good for the kids as well, there's a
Mhm.
developmental phase, I think it's around between 8 and 10 years old, where kids need to start creating a sense of locus of self and they need
Yeah.
to start creating some kind of sense of independence. And as mothers, if we don't allow them to stretch their boundaries and do something on their own for themselves and be a perception of being alone for a bit of time, they will develop anxiety as teenagers. So there's a lot of reason to start thinking about these things because it's good for everybody, obviously within safe parameters. You're not going to go leave your child alone for a couple of hours unattended, but there is
Yes.
space that we all emotionally and mentally need from each other to build our emotional muscles, for want of a better
Right.
word. I
Right.
think that's
Thank
what
you
it
for that.
comes
That
down
is
to.
with the safe assumption that you are leaving your kid with somebody who is safe and they are
Yeah.
well taken care of.
But no,
Yes.
of course. But
Yeah.
otherwise, it's going to cause another level of stress
Yeah.
none of us want to live with. But there has to be a
No.
perception that we are all capable human beings, and that is good for all of our brains.
I think also when we're thinking about what we're passing down to, our children as well, like from a girl's standpoint, teaching them that it is okay for you to go and take care of yourself.
Mm.
We're passing that pattern down of like, it's okay for you to do things that you like to do. It's okay for you to do things that you want to do. But then from a boy standpoint, that you're also teaching them that if they grow up to have partners and wives, that
Exactly.
it's also good for them to create that opportunity for their spouse, their partner to go do things as well. It's like really kind of identifying where these patterns that we typically see in relationships later on, what can we
It
be
does.
it starts with us. I say this all the time and I know how much that can be so hard to realize, but like it comes back to
Yeah.
us. As much as we want other people to be like, yes,
Yeah.
go out, take the time, do what you got to do. I'll take care of the kids. Like, that's great. And I love it when that support comes in. And I hardly ever say no but it
Yeah.
starts with us being the ones that are like, I actually am worthy and deserving of taking this time for me. So I'm going to ask for it. And not only am I going to ask for it, but I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get it. Even if the current people in my life right now can't necessarily support it. Like, I'm going to figure out the options that allow me to get that time. That comes from what we do for ourselves first.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of us struggle with
Yeah.
asking for what we need and assuming that everyone in our lives are mind readers, that they just know when we need a break. No one knows. No one's a mind reader. We have to ask for what we need in life. Um,
Yeah. And I full admit I deal with that too. And I recognize it and I'm like, oh shoot, there it is again.
yeah, because I mean, we would never begrudge someone we care about their timeouts. Why would they begrudge us?
Right.
Like, logically, it makes sense, but we battle to ask for what we need. So it's a really tough thing to get your head around, but it's really important. And again, if you can't do it for yourself, be a role model for your kids and
Mhm.
show them that it's okay to ask for
Yeah.
when they need a timeout as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
We all need it
So
sometimes.
how much of this do you think is due to societal expectations, what we see on social media, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And this is just an area where I'm just scratching the surface, of really looking at like what are yeah, like the societal expectations that are put on just people in general. But, I see this a lot in as far as from maybe the health perspective, but also from Oh, when you start really getting into beliefs and patterns and seeing
Yeah.
people starting to unravel a lot of those things, and bear with me on this. I know this is kind of like a overused word, but really coming back to who they are, right? And that authentic sense of self, of really
Exactly.
what they want to do, what they were maybe in the beginning really meant to do, right? Those with their life, those things, those journeys have a big unraveling of what they learned they should be doing. So a lot of those things come from the family unit in and of itself. It's not just the parents, but it's also the extended family unit.
Hmm.
And those also then can come from societal expectations too. It's just they vary very so much depending on what people are doing. But I would say if we start breaking down the expectations of what moms and like I venture to say as well, like high achieving women tend to pick up on is that especially a sense of like when we are valuable, when we're worthy, is when we are productive and achieving. That in some ways it's lazy to rest.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
lazy to be unproductive, and so many people are allergic to the idea of being called lazy.
Uh-huh.
Because if you're lazy, then you're not producing. And if you think about that from a societal expectation, what are you taught, basically in the school system? It's to be a
Yeah.
productive member of society. They train you essentially to be, well, here in the United States at least, but they train you to be an employee. That's the entire point. Because when you're an employee, you work for the system, which then means when you work for the system, you help keep those societal things moving. The instant that you start breaking that cycle is when they have less, so to speak, control.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so when you start really looking at like if we're going to really work with people on being who they're really meant to be, you're going to be going up against a whole lot of ideas around what women should do, what men should do, what people should do, and how they're supposed to be. And again, you start getting into bigger things as
Yeah.
far as like
Yeah.
what that particular society's goal really is.
It's tough. But I think also there's a gift in there because we have so much choice about what we can
Yeah.
expose ourselves to, is to start finding groups of people who affirm who we actually want to be in the world rather than
Yeah.
people who are confirming what we don't want to be, for want of a better description. So we can choose our tribe. We've got
Yeah.
flexibility to choose our tribe nowadays more than we ever had. Before the internet was around, we were kind of stuck with family paradigms and where we lived and the cultures we were brought up in and the religious spaces we were born into, and those were the paradigms and the messages we were given and what we believed to be
Yeah.
true and imprinted on ourselves. And if those messages were that a mother was in the home and she worked for her family, you would pretty much there was like you'd have to really break from tradition to fight against that. But nowadays, I think if you make a point of it, we can all find support, and people who will back you depending on what you're looking for. So we don't really have to buy into those stories anymore if we choose. Again, it's a choice.
Yes. And on that note, I think where people tend to get a little bit, where it can get a little bit in the mud, so to speak, is when you're making those
Yeah,
transitions.
it's hard.
Because it can be really hard because the people that you are around currently are because they are in alignment with like who you're being,
Sure.
like who you currently are, the beliefs, the way that you are operating. And when you start changing, those
Oh,
relationships start changing. And it can be really painful because you start losing some of those people. But eventually you do find others who start, being in that same level. And as you grow, they keep, some of them will evolve with you and some of them won't, but it's this ever-changing process of people that will come and be a part of that community around you. I did want to say, because when you were just talking, I was like, oh yeah, I remember. As far as like this, even the societal or cultural expectations go, from the flip side, and I'm here in the United States, so like we don't get very much like maternity leave. We don't get a whole lot. I mean, we get like for many women, maybe
yeah.
like 3 months max for working, right? And here also in the United States, it's like we have a lot of families who are double incomes
Yeah.
because it's really hard to
Yeah.
live not on a double income right now. And so what I was looking at as I was doing so much of this research was like looking outside of the United States and how different cultures actually help moms. The support level that is available in many different other
Yeah.
places for women is
Yes.
substantially different than here in the United States. I mean, up to the point that like some cultures, they have a designated person for the mom for an entire year to make sure after giving birth
I
that
know.
her needs are met. Yeah. So, when we're also thinking about like what are some of those expectations or pressures that are put on women and moms, we're especially here in the United States, there's just so much pressure to work. There's so much pressure to do. There's so much pressure to be in that like rush and go, go, go state that, that there's no there. It's not lost on me that this is something that women are really, really struggling with because that support is really necessary. And then that feeds into the rest of motherhood from there, so it doesn't, where we start in that first year postpartum, it's no wonder that people are really struggling with postpartum depression and anxiety and all of these other pieces because the pressure that exists is insane. And then when you think about the depletion that happens from that whole process and then can feed into the rest of motherhood, especially when it's not balanced and addressed, I mean, you're looking at something that is you're burning people out from the beginning.
And it's amazing how,
Yeah.
society is made up and governments and the decision makers and the people who create policies are made up of women as well. And why we don't recognize this and put something in place because
Yeah.
without exception, everyone goes through this. So it's going to take a change at a fundamental level to start changing the way society is because the ripple effect forward to future
Yeah.
generations is
It
very,
is.
very
It is
clear.
for sure. And I hope that I'm going to say this again, it all starts with us. It all starts with us. We have to change first. We have to address those patterns. We have to heal those things that we learned. Remember, like I've been saying this a lot, and I just really love it because we learned something when we were little, which means we can relearn something now. We learned
Yeah,
all of these things, which just means that all we got to do is just see
exactly.
what the pattern is. What do we like? What do we not? What do you want to get rid of? What do you want to change? And now you get to learn something new. And when you're able to do that, then the whole thing shifts. But it's got to start here with us taking that responsibility first for our own life and making the change on that level, because then from there it's like a ripple
Yeah.
effect, right? That then happens down the line, and that is when you actually see cultural and societal changes. Is when enough people are doing what they need to do for themselves, and then it goes from there.
We spoke a little earlier about exercise and sunshine and fresh air and taking 10 minutes to ground yourself and just be in a non-judgmental space. What are some other tips and practical strategies that men and women can start to implement if they are really aware of the fact that they're
Yeah.
overwhelmed, but they just don't know where to start?
Yeah. So I love to couple habits together. So a couple of things that can be really helpful is like you're probably gonna Well, I know some moms don't necessarily eat or drink enough water in their day. So let's maybe start there. Like, let's make sure you're eating enough food and drinking enough
Mm.
water. Like, fill up that water bottle, keep it close to you. Make sure you're drinking enough water. If you can add some electrolytes to that, would love it. Not a bad thing to do. But then on top of that, let's not underestimate the power of actually eating food,
Yeah.
making sure that your body has adequate nutrition. And then on top of that, if you're then going to be, eating 3 to 5 times a day,
Right.
let's add in some very simple exercises that you can do to get your body, your nervous system into that rest, digest, more parasympathetic nervous system place. So what I mean by that is that, you can do things like deep breathing. So belly breathing, where your belly goes out when you breathe in, and then your belly sinks back to your spine when you breathe out. That, and doing like 10 of those before you eat is advantageous, right? Because not only are you now going to get into the rest and digest state, so you'll absorb the food from your gut a far better. But on top of that, now you're giving your body the signals of like, oh, we're safe.
Yeah.
Oh, we're okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this is fine, and it's going to live in that state far more often, which is very critical. Other things you can do too are like, if many people are starting to become a lot more familiar with like EFT and tapping, but so tapping on different parts of your face as well as in just different patterns. I call them ear scissors, which is where you take one finger on 2 fingers, one finger on either side of your ear, splitting your ear, and you drag it up to the top of your ear from the bottom, and then all the way down to your collarbone, basically just like that. And then all the way back up again. Your vagus nerve runs literally right behind your jaw, between like the point of your jaw and your ear. And so what you're doing there is you're massaging and activating that vagus nerve. You do that on both sides a couple of times, and
Wow.
over time, what you should start feeling in your body is kind of like a tingling-ish sensation down into your feet.
Okay.
Over time, when you do that enough and you build up those resources in those tanks, you will start to feel that every time. And it's a great signal that you have activated your parasympathetic nervous system. Again, you're going to be getting into that rest digest place and into that state. And I wouldn't also be surprised if then a few minutes later, a problem that you've been working on might have multiple different solutions, by the time you're done, because it's a very resourced state. So it really helps you kind of gain some perspective and see things a little bit differently. One more that I find really helpful is if you are in straight up overwhelm, kids are chaos, like things are just wild. We didn't even talk about how kids mirror your nervous system and all of that jazz. But the thing that has helped me the most, and I used to use in my practice between clients so that I could reset and not pull another client's stuff into the next one, was I would go and wash my hands, which you typically do in between clients. But instead of it just being an action that I do and then moving on to the next one, I created a bit of intentionality with that practice. So you can leave as long as your kids are safe, right? They might be crying, they might be screaming, they might be doing fighting, as long as they're safe, whatever they're doing, as long as they're okay, you can remove yourself briefly to wash your hands. Pay attention to how the water feels. Take a couple of deep breaths. Feel that water falling over your hands. Really center into that. It's something about the water and the breath that really help to kind of have a reset moment. These are things that you can do at any time and actually might help you maybe not yell at your kids, but also when you're able to go in with a more regulated nervous system, just watch as the chaos that happens tends to just dissolve. It just does, because your kids are fueling off of yours. So when you set the tone for the space, they will start to follow. And so doing anything like that can be very helpful.
Yeah, we underestimate the amount of energy we put into the situation ourselves just by feeling stressed and tense by being in that state.
Yeah.
And everything you've mentioned is super simple. It's cost nothing. It's all for free and it's super simple. And we also underestimate the power of simplicity. So a couple of the things that I've been doing that really help is not reaching for the phone first thing in the morning.
Yes.
Try and wait as long as possible before looking at anything. It's just a reflex. There's no crisis. There's no emergency if there is, obviously you're going to go to your phone, but very often there's no reason to go and reach for your phone the minute your eyes open. And it really makes a huge difference to the way you start the day, if you can just hold off a little bit. Another thing that I found extremely useful, which everyone's heard of, very few people do, is doing a mind dump into a journal before bed. It's just writing down, random thoughts. It doesn't have to be constructive. You don't have to solve problems. You can just dump random thoughts into a book. And the quality of sleep is 100-fold better. And it's, again, for free and simple. And you don't have to pay anyone to do that for you. Really, really good practice. Yeah. Another one that I found works really well when we're feeling overwhelmed is earplugs.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be completely noise cancelling.
Yes.
But there's a nerve in the ear that when there's a slight amount of pressure on that nerve, calms the body. Maybe it's attached to the vagus nerve. I don't know. But when I put those earplugs in, I just feel a sense of ease. And I can still hear, but it doesn't seem the noise and the freneticism in the environment, there's a barrier. And these, again, nobody knows, and it costs next to nothing, and it solves the problem.
Yeah. That journaling, the mind dumping that you mentioned, just that brain dump, just dump it all on the page. I actually find that to be really helpful as well, because sometimes we're so close to our stuff that it's really hard to say, this is what the problem is. But when you can actually dump it on a journal, and if you over time kind of start to see a pattern, it can make it a lot easier to not only be able to get the emotions and the stuff out, which you've got to feel the things, you've got to feel the things. But then once you're able to do that, if you see a commonality, like a through line, right, that is oh, this is actually where I'm actually believing that I'm not okay, I can't do this. Well, now you know where you need to focus. This is where you get resources, where you learn how to learn actually rewire your brain that you are okay and that you can do this, right? Those kinds of things. That can be an extremely helpful resource when you're just doing this on your own and trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do here? Those things are really helpful. And I would say too, as much as any sort of practice that you mentioned, not getting on your phone, but also setting the day for a tone, this is why gratitude practices work so well, is because when you say well, I'm actually really grateful for these things, it tells your brain what to focus on. It says, give me more evidence of this. And so then the days tend to go a little bit smoother and a little bit better, because what your brain is doing what you told it to do, which is to focus more on the things that you're grateful for, that you want to see. So those kinds of practices, while they don't always get to the root of things, they are very helpful for changing your internal state. And when you're able to control that, it usually ends up with a different type of day.
It is. And there again, it comes down to we can control for so much, really, especially when we think we can't. We actually can, by having a little reframe and a little pause before responding. So Dr. Kirstin, thank you again. I love our conversations. They just fly through the minutes, and it's always, it's such a resource to be able to have these mind dumps of ideas, because I don't think there's a single person out there who isn't suffering on some level, irrespective of age, income group, where you are in the world. Everybody's going through something. So all of these glimmers of inspiration and help and support are really, really important. And I really urge people to find you on Instagram and find you on all your social media channels, because this is the kind of positive support we need to surround ourselves with, and to know that you're not alone.
Thank you.
So where can people find more of your work, and how can they best connect with you?
Yeah, I would say right now Instagram is the place. So at Dr. Kirstin is where you can find me. I'm currently in the process of shifting some things around. So Instagram is the place to find me right now. But thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite. Every time you reach out, I'm of course, I will figure out how to be there.
I'm so glad. But thank you. And please take care of yourself. You're really valuable.
Yes,
and you mean a lot to a lot of people. And you really need to, think about it that way. We've got to look after ourselves and each other.
Absolutely. And same to you.
Thank you.